Hi there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be a vlog of the Spring 2022 Toronto School Resource Fair. This is a book-selling event aimed at school librarians and teachers for the purposes of stocking school libraries and classrooms. It's not open to the general public because you cannot buy books on a personal account here. Everything is billed back to the schools. And because this is aimed at school libraries primarily, there are some picture books and middle grade books that are of the type that some booktubers review. Most of what's available at the fair is library binding style reference nonfiction, which I think there's an odd booktuber or two who will talk about this kind of thing, but it is largely the kind of book that goes under the radar on BookTube. Before you ask, no, I'm not a school librarian or teacher, but my sister-in-law is a librarian at a junior public school, and she lets me tag along in exchange for carrying boxes out to her car. For those who are outside of our school system, a junior public school covers the grades from junior kindergarten through grade 6, which means kids who are from the ages of 3 to 12 years. If you've watched my channel for a while, you might remember that I've vlogged the Fall 2019 School Resource Fair, and you'll be relieved to know that I've upgraded my sports camera in the meantime, so hopefully that means that this version will have less shaky cam effect and you'll be less likely to experience motion sickness. And I also won't be carrying around a coffee this time because the free coffee stand would have violated COVID protocols, so the angles should be a little more normal. Those were some critiques of the last one, which were completely fair. Speaking of the pandemic, because we were in various levels of lockdown for the last 2 years, this is actually the first in-person resource fair since that one, nearly 3 years ago. So that was interesting. So on our specific shopping trip, we were operating on a smaller budget this time around and had a different set of classroom-based requirements. So last time we were focused more on engineering, architecture, and holiday-themed nonfiction, as well as picture books featuring Indigenous stories. But this time around, our main mission was to find books that would tie into a curriculum change that has kids studying Canada's early settlement history. So one of our big lucky finds was 2 sets of history texts aimed at the junior audience, one of which was a multi-volume set on the history of New France, and the other one was a set on the history of British North America, which, if you're not familiar with Canadian history, those are the 2 steps of the early colonial history with the French and then the later history with the British. There's a popular impression, I think, that book selection will mostly be based around artistic, literary, or visual choices, but the reality is that this kind of consideration has to supersede those. The content is just more important. So these histories of New France and British North America are written to be as engaging as possible, but their primary role is as a reference, and it's just more important for the kids to have access to books that present facts in a way that is accessible to their reading level than it is to have a book that's maybe more artistically successful that just doesn't have all the facts built into it, and that doesn't really let them practice their research skills, because that is also one of the skills that they're developing when they're doing these research projects. The other area of nonfiction that we were focused on that carries over from the last one too, actually, were dinosaur books. Dinosaur books are always popular, which means they get taken out of the library more often and used in classes more often, which means they're damaged more often. So there's always a need to replace those. That's another one we were out for. One of the other goals was to pick up early reader books that tie into some of the popular kids media and new sports stars, especially hockey, soccer, and gymnastics. Since those rotate in and out of fashion, players retire, and a single generation is just a couple of years when it comes to the elementary school audience, so that's something you have to replace all the time. And this is, again, it's one of those things that I think people who aren't dealing directly with the education system frown on from a creative or artistic perspective. But since the goal is to have new readers practice their skills, having books that tie into their favorite films, cartoons, and sports teams and sports stars is essential. I've been informed by my sister-in-law that the Spider-Man and Encanto tie-ins that we picked up have already been big hits. And also the Lego-themed set of engineering books was also a big hit. And no worries, we also did pick up some picture books that aren't associated with brands like Disney or sports. But again, this is a case where, especially when it comes to struggling readers, the most vital element is that the book is capturing the child's interest so that they'll want to read it on their own. Because there's always a place for beautiful, high-quality artistic picture books, and those are often what the librarians and classroom teachers are going to read to the young kids. And hopefully the parents as well. But realistically, kids on their own, a lot of them are going to want to see something familiar. And when it comes to getting them to practice reading, that is the most important thing. Also, there's always a place for the high quality, beautiful picture book, but many of those have a timeless quality and just won't need to be replaced as often. But especially the books that are being read by the teachers or librarians to the kids, they just don't suffer as much damage, which is, again, one of the reasons they need to be replaced. Getting off that topic, there were a number of new books on the pandemic theme, and we didn't pick any of those up since, on the one hand, yes, it's topical, but they're going to be out of date almost immediately since our knowledge of the science behind the virus is still a work in process, and the social history is still developing. I did see a few people picking those up, but yeah, I don't think they're going to age well, and maybe in a year or two there'll be new editions of those books that will be better and have more staying power. Although, speaking of different editions, we also picked up a few updates to a series of holiday books since, and as unfortunately sometimes happened, some of the originals missed some of the diversity within the religions that were the focus of the holidays of each book. In this case, for example, the book on Christianity largely ignored Eastern Orthodox distinctions, and the book on Islam largely ignored Shia ones, which is a gap from a general educational perspective, but is an especially glaring one for a school in which many of the kids have roots in either Greece or Iran. So if you watch Karen from the Roving Readers videos, she's made videos about window books and mirror books. Do you see someone else or do you see yourself? And that kind of absence, it means that they're a bit of neither. The kids who could see themselves are missing it, and the kids who could learn something also missing it. So yeah, and this will sound like a funny connection, although maybe not to anyone who is a sports fan at the religious level. But keeping an eye out for that kind of absence is also something that comes up in the sports books as well. Not necessarily in terms of facts, but in terms of how varied the teams and regions and players are in the books. So it's always good to flip through them and see, is this aimed at a very narrow audience? Because that may not be what you want for your particular school. Because we saw a few books, a few hockey books that were not as diverse as would be ideal for the audience that we were shopping for. So yeah, as I mentioned, we were specifically shopping for younger audience material, but I did slip away to film a few sections of the material aimed at teen and adult audiences, more for the high school market, since I do think people on BookTube tend to be more interested in that kind of thing, even though we weren't really shopping for any of that material. And I had originally planned to also include a flip-through of a catalog from one of the suppliers, but unfortunately it was accidentally boxed up with the books and taken off to the school and recycled. So that'll be one for next time. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed joining us on this walkthrough of the fair. If you've stocked any classrooms or libraries yourself, I'd love to hear about the criteria you've used and what you were looking for in terms of books that match the curriculum needs and also books that match the interests of the kids. So yeah, that's it for now. Ciao.